Hi there. Okay, so you probably watched a couple of videos about math antics and starting about algebra and how to solve linear equations, and that's awesome. And I want to show you an alternative way to solve linear equations, and it's called the story of x. Okay, so but what we pretty much want to do is write out the steps that describe the operations being performed on x. When we have simple equations, this isn't really necessary, but as things get more complicated, this becomes very handy. I'll always show you both ways, and you can choose which way works best for you. Okay, I'm going to do this video in its entirety. I suggest that you watch one section, pause, watch the next section, pause, and etc. like that. Okay. So basically what we're going to do is construct the equation and then deconstruct it and then solve it. Okay, so step one, start with the variable. List the operations that are happening to it, starting with what is closest to x. That's really important. We want to start with what is closest to x and then move away from it. On the deconstruction side, we're going to reverse the order of the steps from the construction story and then do the opposite. Okay, and then we'll solve. Okay, here we go. So I'm gonna have a pen. Hope I don't make any mistakes. Okay, and a pencil. Okay. So the first equation that we have here is x plus 7 equals 18. Okay, so on the construction side, we're gonna write it in words and then we're gonna write it in symbols. Okay, so the first thing we do is we start off with x. Okay, which is a symbol, is also x. Okay, and the next thing we notice that happens to x is we add 7. Okay, so we're going to add 7. And what would that look like in symbols? We're going to have x plus 7. Okay, and our result equals 18. Okay, and so in our symbols, it would look like x plus 7 equals 18. Okay, so we've constructed our story of x. Now let's deconstruct it. Okay, so we start with 18. Okay, now what's the opposite of this operation? Okay, right on. So we're going to subtract 7. Okay, so that would be 18 minus 7, okay, equals 11. Okay, so and then we're going to have the value for x equals 11. Okay, so we built it up and then we did the opposite and tore it down. Okay, so now let's see what that looks like when we actually do the equation ourselves. We go to solve it. Okay, so I'm going to use pencil here. Okay, so x plus 7 equals 18. Okay, so I want to do the opposite, so I'm going to use my deconstruction story to solve it. Okay, so I'm going to subtract 7. So subtract 7 on both sides, right? So that's going to cancel the 7s out on the left side, and I'm left with x equals 11. Okay, and then we've solved. This was a one-step problem. So I'm going to write that up here. One step. Okay, and if we wanted to prove it and check our work, which is excellent and something I suggest you do for all of your problems to make sure you got it right, we take our original equation and wherever we have x, we plug in the value we just found. So instead of x, I'm going to put 11 plus 7 equals 18. Okay, so I'm going to simplify this. 11 plus 7 equals 18. The right side is still 18. Hey, they're both the same. Right on. There we go. So we know that we solved this equation correctly. Right on. Like you do pause here and come back when it's time for two-step problems. Okay, let's try an equation that is a little bit harder, okay? So here we have 5x plus 1 equals 21. So let's construct the story, right? We're going to start with x, because that's what our story is about, okay? And the first thing that's happening to x is it's being multiplied by 5, okay? So multiply by 5, okay? And what does that look like in symbols? 5x, okay? Next, what's happening to it? We're adding 1. Add 1, okay? So for symbols, that would look like 5x plus 1, okay? And our result equals 21, or 5x plus 1 equals 21. Okay, so here we built our equation and the story, and now let's take it apart. Okay, so we'll start with 21. Okay, and now we're going to do the opposite, but when we deconstruct it, we start from the bottom and then work our way back up. Okay, so the opposite of adding is subtracting. So we're going to subtract 1. So this is going to be 21 minus 1, which is 20. Then the opposite of dividing, is multiplying. Opposite of multiplying is dividing. So we're going to have divide by 5. Okay, so I'm going to have 20 divided by 5. Okay, so what is our value of x? X equals 4. Okay, so this is a two-step problem. Okay, so if I were to set that up how I normally would, if I wanted to show the different steps, we have 5x plus 1 equals 21. Okay, so the first thing I want to do, subtract 1. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. Okay, the 1s will cancel out on the left. That leaves me with 5x equals 20. And then I'm going to divide by 5. And I do my operations in a different color so that I can see what I've done and keep track of them. So 5 divided by 5 is just 1. So that leaves me with x. 20 divided by 5 is 4. Right on, which is what we got. Okay. So now if we want to check our work, 5x plus 1 equals 21. 5, and then I replace the x with a 4. And notice how I'm using parentheses to show multiplication. Plus 1 equals 21. And then I can follow my order of operations, right? 5 times 4 is 20. Plus 1 equals 21. 20 plus 1 is 21. Hey-o! Right on. We got it. Okay? Nice. So that's how you do a two-step problem. Okay? Next up is a three-step problem. Okay. So here we have 2 bracket x plus 1 minus 3 equals 5. Okay? So I think you're going to start to understand how this is going in the flow. Okay, so we set up our equation. We have x, we have, actually no one. Yeah, that's fine. The first thing we're gonna do is we look inside the brackets, right? So the closest thing that's happening to x is we're adding 1. Okay, so it's gonna be x plus 1. Next thing that happens to x, well, it's being multiplied by 2. Okay, so multiply by 2. Okay, so that looks like that. Okay, so now we've taken care of this part, and then what's the last thing that's happening here? We're subtracting 3. Subtract 3, so that looks like 2x plus 1 minus 3, and our result is 5. Okay, so 2x x plus 1 minus 3 equals 5. Okay, so now if we want to deconstruct this, okay, we're going to start with 5. Okay, and we're going to start with the opposite. So the opposite of subtracting, we're going to add 3. Okay, so 5 plus 3, 8. Okay, next one, opposite of multiplying, we're going to divide by 2. Okay, so 8 divided by 2 gives us 4. Okay, and the last one we're going to, oh, what's the opposite of adding? Subtracting. It happens all the time. See, I make the same mistake. Subtract 1. So I'm going to have 4 minus 1 equals 3, which should give us our value for x. X equals 3. Okay. Now this isn't the correct way to communicate math. That's why I'm showing you how to solve it over here. Okay, so let's write that out. 2x plus 1 minus 3 equals 5. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to add 3 to both sides. Okay, so plus 3, those cancel out, right? Plus 3 minus 3 would be 0. So now I have 2x plus 1 equals 8. Now I'm going to divide by 2. So I divide the left side and the right side by 2. So now my 2's will cancel out. And now I'm left with x plus 1 equals 8 divided by 2 is 4. Okay, you don't have to keep the brackets anymore if that's all you have left. Okay, and then I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. The ones cancel out on the left, and I have x equals 3. Hey, right on. Okay, so this shows us the steps that we're doing, and this shows us how to properly communicate it. Okay, so if we want to check our work and make sure we got that right, okay, I rewrite the equation, and then wherever I see an x, I'm going to plug in 3. So 2 bracket 3 plus 1 minus 3 equals 5. 2 times 4 minus 3 equals 5. 2 times 4 is 8. Minus 3 equals 5. 8 minus 3 is 5. Hey-o. I love that. Just checking the work. Oh, that is so satisfying. Okay, so that was a 3-step problem. Okay, let's take a look at a 4-step problem. Turn your page over. And now we're going to, now you can see the equation's a lot bigger, and you notice how I've taken away a lot of the writing, okay? And we're just gonna simplify this as well. Okay, so this is it might look a lot more complicated, but don't worry, it's not bad at all. Okay, so here we're using the variable p. Okay, so for construction, p, what's the first thing that's happening to p? It's being multiplied by 3. Okay, so I'm just going to make it a lot easier to write. Okay, so multiplied by 3. Next thing that happens to 3 or p, the closest thing, is we are dividing by 4, okay? And the next thing that's happening to p, oh, look at this, we are adding 7/8. Okay, so now to deconstruct this, I'm just going to go across here and right away write what is the opposite operation, okay? So plus 7/8 is minus 7/8. Divided by 4 would be multiplied by 4. And multiplied by 3, which would be divided by 3. Okay? So when I set up this little table, which you'll do with your own equations, I just kind of set up a T, and then I write down the operations that I see. On the other side, I write down the opposite operation, and then I just work my way from the bottom up. Okay, and as I do each operation, I check it off to make sure that I don't miss it or I don't duplicate it. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean. So let's write out the equation. We have 3p divided by 4 plus 7/8 equals 1/2. And you might be like, oh my goodness, this is going to be so hard. I promise it's not. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is subtract 7/8. Okay, so I'm going to subtract 7/8 from both sides. Okay, so on the left side, that will cancel out. So I'll be left with 3p divided by 4. And 1/2 minus 7/8. Well, if we want to subtract two fractions, they have to have the same denominator, right? So how do I make 2 into 8? I'm going to multiply it by 4, okay? So 1 by 4 is 4, 2 by 4 is 8. There we go. Now, 4 minus 7 minus 3, and our denominator stays the same, right? We keep the denominator, we just subtract the numerators. Okay, so now we've done that. Okay, next we're going to multiply it by 4. Okay, so I'm going to multiply the left side by 4, and I'm going to multiply the right side by 4. Okay, notice how I put the 4 in the numerator because it's a whole number, right? So when I have a 4 in the numerator and the 4 in the denominator, they cancel out. So what am I left with on the left side? 3p. Okay, on the right side, what do I get? Well, I can reduce this first, right? 4 and 8. 4 goes into 4 one time, and 4 goes into 8 two times. Okay, so I'll have minus 3 over 2. Okay, right on. Okay, so now, done that one. Next one is divided by 3. Okay, so now I'm going to divide this by 3, and I'm going to divide this whole fraction by 3. Okay, and you know what? I'm going to write it in an easier way for us to visualize it. So I'm going to divide this by 3 over 1. Okay. 3 in the numerator, 3 in the denominator, that cancels out, so we're left with p. Now, if we want to divide a fraction, right, we have to inverse and then multiply. So that's going to be the same as saying negative 3 times 1 and 2 times 3. So I'm going to have minus 3 over 6. Okay, which is the same thing as saying p equals negative 1/2. Okay, so you always want to simplify and reduce to lowest terms. So let's check if we were right. Oh, check that off. There we go. We took care of all 3 stages. Okay, let's see if we can write it in the small space here. Okay, so we have 3p divided by 4 plus 7/8 equals 1/2. Okay, so we have 3. I'm going to change 3 to 3 over 1 because we're going to multiply that by negative 1 over 2. Okay, and we're going to divide that whole thing by 4 plus 7/8 equals 1/2. Okay, so let's simplify this here. 2 fractions multiplied by each other is going to be negative 3 over 2, right on, and we want to divide that whole thing by 4, so we're going to divide it by 4 over 1. Okay, and that's just going to be easier to look at. Plus 7 over 8 equals 1/2. Means the exact same thing as if we kept it over 4. I think this is just easier for us to see. Okay, so remember, if we want to divide, we're going to multiply it first. So 3 over 2 times 1/4 plus 7/8 equals 1/2. So now we can just multiply numerator and denominator. So we get negative 3 over 8 plus 7/8 equals 1/2. Negative 3 plus 7 is 4 over 8 equals 1/2. Hey-o! Hey, right on. Oh, that feels so good. I love that. I love checking. Oh, I love it. So it just makes things so much easier. Okay, so this was also a 3-step problem. Okay, and the last one I want to do is a 4-step problem. Okay, so here we have a variable w. Okay, and I'll try and go through this a little bit quicker now that you should feel pretty comfortable with this. So to start with, we have w. First thing that happens to it, we subtract 4. Next thing that happens to it, we multiply by 3. Next thing that happens to w, we divide by 4. And the next thing that happens to it, we subtract 6. Okay? So on this side, what is the opposite of each of these operations? Opposite of minus, add. Opposite of divide, multiply. Opposite of multiply, divide. Opposite of subtract, add. Okay, so we set up our equation going this way. We're going to take it apart going this way. Okay, so I'm going to write out my equation here. 3w minus 4 divided by 4 minus 6 equals minus 3. First thing I'm going to do, add 6. Okay, so add 6 to both sides. So these cancel off, so I'm left with 3w minus 4 divided by 4 equals 3. Okay, check. Next one is times by 4. Okay, so now I'm going to multiply this whole thing by 4. Okay, the 4's will cancel out on the left side, and I'm left with 3 bracket w minus 4 equals 12. Okay, done that. Next one, divide by 3. Divide both sides by 3. Okay, and if you need to pause the video at any time, don't worry, just do it. Do your next step, unpause and come back. 3's cancel out. Okay, so I'm going to left with w minus 4 on the left side, and on the right side, we have 12 divided by 3, which is 4. Awesome. Check. Okay, and our last step, we're going to add 4 to both sides. Okay, 4's cancel out. I'm left with w. Okay, and 4 plus 4 is 8. Hey, oh, I love this. This feels so satisfying. Okay, w equals 8. So let's check and see if we got that right. Okay, so 3w minus 4 all divided by 4 minus 6 equals minus 3. Sorry, I made that a very tiny space. Okay, so 3 bracket 8 minus 4. You can pause this and just do it yourself and then come back and check and see. Because I'm going to work pretty quick here. So 8 minus 4 is 4. I'll still do it just step by step. I'm just following order of operations, right? 3 times 4 is 12 divided by 4 minus 6 equals minus 3. 12 divided by 4 is 3 minus 6 equals minus 3. Minus 3 equals minus 3. Hey-o! Right on. There you go. Oh, that feels so good. Excellent. So I hope you're feeling more and more confident using the story of x in order to solve linear equations. Nice job.